A body has been discovered in the countryside.
The body was dressed in a dress.
But reports of further bodies point towards a serial killer.
It's very disturbing. Somebody's going around murdering male victims.
We were really conscious of the scale of what we were now dealing with. Have we just got 3 bodies? Are we going to find more bodies?
Every killer leaves a trace. It's up to us to find the evidence to catch the killer.
It's Easter weekend. Detective Superintendent Jeff Hill responds to a 999 call in the Cambridgeshire countryside. A dog walker has found a body in a ditch.
This body was found face down in this water-filled ditch here. He was naked from the waist down, and his backside, his buttocks were in the air.
One of the things which stood out to us all, the body was dressed in an item of ladies' clothing, a dress, and that clearly is very unusual.
The detectives hypothesise this to be either a case of misadventure or murder. They shut down the roads and cordon off the area. Sarah Thurkel has investigated hundreds of crime scenes and is one of the UK's leading forensic trainers.
An outdoor scene is quite a difficult scene to process quite quickly. You're very much determined by the weather, the daylight hours, wind factors, members of the public. We'd have to cordon off quite a large area because we don't know if there's other evidence further down the lane. I would immediately call a pathologist to attend the scene so that the maximum amount of forensic evidence could be recovered from the body in situ.
A pathologist is called to the scene. When turning the body, they discover multiple stab wounds to the chest. A murder investigation is immediately launched.
The pathologist may well give an indication at the scene to say, I think it's the cause of death may well be this, but it would be down to the actual post-mortem before an official cause of death is given.
The body is taken to the mortuary for the post-mortem examination, and the CSIs begin the forensic harvest, hoping to find traces of the killer at the crime scene.
As a CSI, I would be checking the roadway, any lay-bys or any tyre track marks in the area. There might be footprints in the mud, there might be forensic evidence that's been left in the ditch, there might be fibre evidence, any blood evidence. So our search area is potentially very wide in an external scene.
Crime author and criminologist Christopher Berry-D has researched more than 100 murder cases.
I've looked at many homicide cases where the most unlikely locations turns up with a dead body. We don't associate brutal homicide to a peaceful flat country area. We associate that with probably the inner cities. But murder most foul happens everywhere.
A closer inspection of the scene reveals there are no signs of blood or an obvious struggle.
We were very conscious that it may be a deposition site and we were actually looking for a murder scene somewhere else.
We might have another scene that's the victim's house. We might have another scene that's the victim's car. So one body can lead to immediately 6 or 7 other scenes.
Identifying the body is critical. Whilst the detectives investigate all lines of inquiry, they learn of an abandoned, burnt-out Ford Mondeo in Yaxley, just 10 miles away.
somebody has actually gone to the trouble of removing that car to somewhere fairly rural and setting it on fire to reduce the potential the police had to recover forensic evidence from it.
Police looked at the VIN number or the number plate, and they suddenly discovered this car was owned by a man called Kevin Lee, who owned a series of rented properties.
Kevin's property business provides social housing to individuals primarily on low income.
Kevin acquired low-quality housing, made them habitable, and effectively operated them as houses of multi-occupancy. They were in areas where sometimes there were high levels of crime.
This is the area where Kevin Lee had a property.
Kevin Lee hadn't turned up home that night, and his wife was very, very worried, and she started phoning around friends.
One friend tells Kevin's wife that they last saw Kevin at one of his properties in Rolleston Garth.
She entered this property, and it smelt wrong. She smelt this bleach, and she felt it was unusual, so she called the police.
His wife had gone to the address at Rolleston Garth. Blinds were closed, the lights were on, but he wasn't there. His car had been seen by a family member and a friend driving off at speed.
Police head to the address at Rolleston Garth, and upon entering, they find blood spatter on the wall. The property is quickly secured as a crime scene.
The amount of blood spatter in this scene would indicate that it's a very sustained and long attack. There's quite a lot of low-level blood spatter. That would indicate that the attack might have been when the victim's been lying on the floor.
Detectives search the crime scene, and there are no signs of a struggle or forced entry. But when they enter the backyard, they find an upturned sofa.
There was blood spattered on the feet of the sofa. For blood to seep into the wood would mean that there has been a huge amount of blood within that scene, and that settee has been stood in pools of blood.
While forensic tests are carried out to see if the blood matches the body in the ditch, the CSIs investigate the overpowering smell of bleach.
So to be able to smell that within a crime scene indicates that there has been an attempt to clear up some evidence within that scene. As a crime scene manager, that would absolutely make me more determined to be able to prove that something has happened within that scene.
To determine if there has been a clean-up of blood, CSIs employ a specialist chemical called luminol.
The active reagent within luminol reacts with the iron in the blood, and it will fluoresce like a blue colour under a certain wavelength of light. The results indicates that there has been an attempt to clear up some evidence within that scene. Within the crime scene, we would also look for other trace evidence, so we'd look for fingerprints, but also maybe footprints. These were lifted using a black gel lift and photograph.
Back at the mortuary, post-mortem results from the body in the ditch point towards a violent attack. With the cause of death confirmed as stab wounds to the heart and lungs.
There were defence injuries, which indicates that he had put up sustained effort to preserve his life whilst he was being attacked by an offender. Defence injuries tend to be on somebody's hands or the upper part of their arms, where someone might have put up their hands to protect themselves or fight back.
With defence wounds found on the arms and hands, fingernail clippings are taken to look for any trace evidence of an offender. While they wait for forensic results from the lab, police hypothesise whether the body in the ditch could be connected to the crime scene at Rolleston Garth, and that the body might be Kevin's.
Whilst there was no confirmation that it was Kevin at that stage, given that Kevin had gone missing and a male of a similar age had been found not a huge distance away from where he was last seen, then there was the potential to connect the two.
Kevin's wife is asked to come to the mortuary for a formal identification. Tragically, she identifies the body as her husband, 48-year-old Kevin Lee.
So who was Kevin Lee involved with that might do something terrible to him?
A body found in the Cambridgeshire countryside has been confirmed as 48-year-old Kevin Lee. The cause of death? Multiple stab wounds to the chest. Blood staining was discovered at one of his properties, and there is evidence that a clean-up has occurred. Forensic results from the unidentified blood will determine if this was the site of Kevin Lee's murder. Tony Ann recalls meeting Kevin Lee for the first time.
I first met Kevin Lee when I was about 11 or 12 at a family barbecue, and I just remember he was very quiet at first, and then obviously this vibrant person came out, and I remember he had a sausage because he took over the barbecue and he threw it and it landed in next door's neighbour and the dog ate it. And I didn't meet up with him again until I needed him as a fully grown adult when he became my landlord.
Kevin managed multiple occupancy houses, and Tony Ann became one of his tenants after falling on hard times.
When I moved into the Byfield property, he didn't charge me a deposit because he understood I was in need, and he really helped me, and he even got me a double bed.
After settling into a new home in Byfield, Tony Ann hears rumours of her landlord's private life.
He was lovely, he did help people, but he did have extramarital affairs. We knew this woman was going around with Kev Lee, and she was a flirtatious, boisterous woman.
When Kevin goes missing, his wife's desperation to find him prompts her to make her own inquiries.
She got hold of some phone details and she started phoning all the numbers on Kevin's list. And one number came up where the person answered and then it dropped the phone, it switched the phone off.
As an early line of inquiry, police use phone data analysis to track the phone's location, hoping it may lead to information regarding Kevin's death.
So cell site data is the information that we get when a mobile phone connects to a mast or a cell that would connect it to a mobile network. Knowing when a mobile connected to a particular cell or a particular mast would allow us to then identify the location, and then if the phone is obviously with a perpetrator or a victim, then we can trace the person as well.
The police zeroed in and that phone had been used very, very close to where the burnt out car was found. And that phone was registered to a girl called Joanna Christine Dennehy.
Police checks reveal that Joanna Dennehy is 30 years old and a tenant at one of Kevin's properties in Byfield.
As a result of Joanna Dennehy becoming of interest to the inquiry, officers went to Byfield primarily to establish her movements and whether she potentially had any information which may have assisted us in understanding what happened to Kevin Lee.
When detectives arrive, Joanna is not present. But there is one tenant at the property, 36-year-old Leslie Layton.
Leslie Layton would have been asked about Joanne and her movements and what had been going on at the premises. Something about his behaviour caused the officers there to believe that he probably wasn't being entirely truthful.
Officers search the property, and what they find is potentially incriminating.
There was this mattress in the garden which had blood staining on it.
The blood staining on the mattress was very localised within the centre of the mattress. It would mean that maybe someone's been attacked whilst incapacitated on the bed. The fact that there was no apparent blood distribution on the mattress might indicate that this was a very quick attack. The whole mattress would have been seized from the garden with a sample of the blood taken for urgent analysis to see if the blood on the mattress matches the DNA from our victim. Or if it doesn't, who else might it match?
A further search of the rest of the property reveals that a mattress is missing from one of the bedrooms, along with the occupant, 56-year-old John Chapman.
John still had it come for his roast dinner at mine. So I knew something was wrong there when he didn't come for my cooking. I'm ringing John's phone. It's off. Loads of times I called it. By the end of that day, I was reporting John missing.
With their landlord found murdered, the detectives investigate if the disappearance of John and Joanna are connected. When they look into Joanna's cell phone data, it shows her phone pinging against various masts in and around East Anglia, at the same time as someone else's. The team run checks on the second number, and it links to another career criminal, 47-year-old Gary Stretch.
Gary Stretch had a very extensive criminal record, going back some 30 years. He'd been in and out of custody, was a thief, and was well known in the Peterborough area to the police. I believe his birth name was Gary Richards, and that he adopted the name Stretch because it was a nickname because of how tall he was. And so was somebody that was not only a career criminal, but somebody who was very identifiable as well.
He's the second tallest man in the UK at 7'3". He was a burglar at one time with his size 16 feet. He was not cut out for that. In fact, one police officer told me that when Gary Stretch went through a window, his feet followed about half an hour later.
A search on the police national database indicated that after serving time in prison, Gary Stretch met Joanna Dennehy at a bail hostel, and the two became associated.
They decided to go to Peterborough and happened upon Kevin Lee and his business partner. Now, his business partner took one look at Joanna Dennehy and shook his head. But she flirted with Kevin Lee. And Kevin Lee agreed with her that she could move into his properties and renovate them rent-free. And Gary Stretch would help her.
Shortly after Joanna moved in, the other residents found her very intimidating.
The first time I felt threatened about Joanna Dennehy was an altercation in John Chapman's bedroom. I'd heard banging and a bit of shouting, so I've gone up to make sure John Chapman's okay. And I was like, everything okay, John? And he was like, they're trying to take my money, she's got my post office card. Meaning Joanna Dennehy took his post office card. I was like, please may you return it. And she looked at me, held the card up and said, it's mine now, I'm in charge.
As the search for Dennehy and Stretch continues, forensic results are in from the lab.
The blood found on the sofa at Rolleston Garth was confirmed to be that of Kevin Lee, which would suggest that this is the scene where he'd been attacked and murdered.
But the DNA results from the blood spatter on the wall throws the investigation into disarray.
The results were from an unidentified individual that was not Kevin Lee.
And the DNA results from the mattress at the second property at Byfield come back as another unidentified individual, indicating that there could be multiple victims involved.
It might also be a huge link between potential further victims of maybe a serial killer.
Police fear the worst. In an effort to locate Dennehy and Stretch, they return to the only remaining tenant still at Byfield.
The police now zero on Leslie Leighton. He knows nothing about anything. He's keeping his mouth shut. But he does volunteer the fact that Joanna Dennehy and a man called Gary Stretch have gone on what they call the lam. They've cleared off in a car.
This corresponds with the cell site data, showing both suspects' mobiles moving east across Norfolk.
Dennehy and Stretch were clearly on the run, and we discussed the unusual step of putting their faces out to the media to say that they were wanted by the police. Stretch is over 7 foot tall, and Dennehy has a tattoo star on her face. So anybody looking like that are probably going to be the people we're looking for.
Within a matter of hours, police receive a report of a theft at a garage in Norfolk. Upon closer inspection of the CCTV footage, the suspected shoplifter fits the description of Joanna Dennehy. The woman is then seen leaving in a green Vauxhall Astra, and the registration number is caught on camera.
We established it was Dennehy and Stretch, and we got the index number of the vehicle, which then enabled us to load that onto ANPR.
ANPR is the automatic number plate recognition system. So this is very helpful for investigators because obviously it can identify a vehicle that is moving across the country or in a particular area. And then if we know that this vehicle belongs to a suspect or a victim, then we might be able to locate that vehicle.
Yet in a sudden change of direction, the car is picked up heading west across the country. The police home in on their two suspects, but they're too late.
In no way could we ever have predicted the events which unfolded in West Mercia on that day.
Joanna Dennehy gets out of the car, she walks up behind this man and she stabs him in the back. And he said, "What are you doing?" And Joanna Dennehy says, "I want to fucking kill you."
A body found in a ditch has been identified as 48-year-old landlord Kevin Lee. DNA results from a blood-stained sofa indicate he was murdered at one of his properties in Rolleston Garth in North Peterborough. Police need to speak to Joanna Dennehy, one of Kevin Lee's tenants, whose mobile phone was pinged by cell site analysis close to Kevin's burnt-out car. A blood-stained mattress discovered at Dennehy's accommodation in Byfield is suspected to belong to her missing flatmate, John Chapman.
His phone was still off, so I tried numerous times throughout, I think it was until about 12:30, and then I started to worry.
Using automatic number plate recognition and cell site analysis, police are tracking Dennehy and her associate Gary Stretch, driving a green Vauxhall Astra to the other side of the country in West Mercia.
We made available all of our information to the West Mercia police. We were very, very keen to apprehend them sooner rather than later.
As several units are dispatched to apprehend the suspects, an alarming 999 call comes in of a knife attack in Hereford.
They're driving along and Joe says, "Stop, Gary, I want that dog." And it was a man walking his dog. She stabbed him a few times, she kept stabbing him, and she just calmly walked away, licking the blood off the blade of this knife. Got in the car with Gary Stretch and said, "Thanks, Gary, for having some fun, I want some more." And they drove off, leaving this man on the pavement.
The victim is identified as 57-year-old retired fireman Robin Berezza. Minutes later, police are alerted to a second attack.
Less than half a mile away, she did the same to another man, but this time far worse.
The victim is 64-year-old John Rogers, who collapsed to the ground, having been stabbed several times. Dennehy and Stretch make off in the green Astra, and the paramedics rush to the victim's aid.
Once we were contacted by West Mercia, we were really conscious of the scale of what we were now dealing with.
Desperate to catch Dennehy and Stretch before they strike again, police flood the area.
There's police sirens everywhere. The police are now converging on this vehicle.
Through a combination of sightings and cell data analysis, police trap the car in a cul-de-sac. They find Joanna Dennehy sitting calmly inside with her victim's dog on her lap. Stretch has made a run for it on foot, but is quickly apprehended by armed police.
He turned around to the police and he said, "I'm the most wanted man in England. We are the new Bonnie and Clyde."
The police finally have their suspects in custody.
You've been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and murder. Okay. So how much do we have straight to that?
How got a whiskey this morning? Expensive stuff.
First thing she did, standing up in front of the custody sergeant, say, "I don't look like a serial killer, do I?" And she started flirting with him.
You're very distinctive either.
I know, that's what you keep saying. So it's rapid takedown.
That everyone's completely over.
And you can see her pathology coming out, the way she thinks she can control men.
You're decent, copper.
And then she started chatting to the woman officer, as if nothing had happened.
Murder, something. So going down for Sunday Road.
And that is the true nature of a homicidal psychopath. No feelings. Where there should be a conscience, there's a black hole.
In the custody footage, Joanna appears to be euphoric, in a positive state of mind, bubbly, smiling and upbeat. Narcissists and psychopaths can learn such behaviours in order to get the outcome that they're looking for. They're not necessarily genuine behaviours, but like an actor who puts on a display to behave in a certain way in certain situations.
Dennehy and Stretch were subsequently charged with the assaults of the attacks down in West Mercia and remanded into custody. They were no longer at large, no longer a threat, and we can interview them pretty much at our leisure.
Whilst in custody, their clothing is seized and the car is taken in for analysis, where a key piece of evidence is located inside: a 3-inch fold knife covered in blood.
This knife would have been linked to injuries on any of the victims. They would have examined the knife for DNA on the handle and any blood on the blade of the knife.
The first victim, Robin Berezza, suffered 2 stab wounds. John Rogers suffered more than 30 stab wounds. Both remain in critical condition. Whilst the detectives begin to collate the forensic evidence in preparation for the custody interviews, a 999 call comes in. Another dog walker has found 2 more bodies.
Just down here wasn't unlike how it is today, actually. The ditch was partially filled with water as it is now, and the bodies were just around here next to each other, almost fully submerged.
I was thinking, have we just got 3 bodies? Are we going to find more bodies?
There's a decomposed body, and then there's a second body that's clearly fresher and hasn't been there as long.
A closer look at the less decomposed body strikes a resemblance to John Chapman, who has been missing for several days.
We were looking for John Chapman, and so we were effectively looking to see if either of these bodies were in fact him, and we were able to establish that one of them was John Chapman.
All I remember is just sitting on my kitchen floor just screaming because it was John, because I was close to him. Yeah, that got me. Because I just thought, why John? He wouldn't harm anyone. Wouldn't harm a soul.
Police still need to identify the other body. Fingerprints are scanned at the scene, and there's a match to an EU biometric card within the national database. 31-year-old Łukasz Slabazuski.
Łukasz was a Polish guy, happy-go-lucky, had a family, friends and stuff in Poland, a little town in Poland. He was working as a courier driver in a warehouse or something.
Both the victims stabbed in West Mercia are now in a non-critical state. Dennehy and Stretch are kept on remand for attempted murder.
Joanne, can you please state your full name and your date of birth?
Joanna Christina Dennehy, 29th of the 8th of 1918.
The murder investigation team start building the case against both suspects to charge them with the murders of the 3 victims discovered in the ditches.
With Dennehy and Stretch in custody, we could start to gather all that evidence in a more methodical way.
With multiple victims to investigate, police work to establish a chronology of Dennehy's crimes. The digital forensic team look at Lukash's digital footprint, which reveals a cash withdrawal in Peterborough. Using the ATM ID, the experts harvest CCTV from the vicinity, which provides a timestamp of when Lukash was alive. Witness statements from Lukash's friends and family suggest that he met Dennehy later that day, 10 days before Kevin Lee's murder.
From what the police can gather, he was in a shopping mall, and Flirty Joe goes up to him and starts chatting him up. And he phoned his sister that evening and said, "I've met a beautiful girl. My life's changed. I'm going to see her tonight." And he went round to Rolleston Garth, the house where Joanne Dennehy was.
The pathologist confirms that Lukash was killed by a single stab wound to the heart. The forensic lab compares his blood sample to the unidentified blood spatter at Rolleston Garth, and there is a match. The forensic evidence indicates that this was the location of his murder.
Just as he got in the door, she attacked him with this knife. He never saw it coming.
Perhaps Joanna enjoyed the power, the control she may have experienced immediately after the attack. This positive experience, from her perspective, may have prompted her to go out and carry out more attacks later on.
Witness statements from John Chapman's friends establish that Dennehy moved into the property in Byfield 10 days after Lukash's murder.
John Chapman was basically saying the mad woman is in the house. I can't use the bathroom because Joanna's in there. I can't use the kitchen because Joanna's in there. Joanna's having parties. And poor John, bless him, Joanna actually accused John of staring at her in the bathroom. All John was doing was walking upstairs to his room. So I think that might have been her trigger for John.
It's reported that Joanna killed John because he was looking at her in the bathroom. In this way, we see her place the blame on John in order to justify her own action, and that what she did wasn't wrong.
Did you murder John Chapman?
No comment.
The post-mortem reveals that John died from a stab wound to the chest, and forensic results link his DNA to the blood on the mattress at Byfield.
The blood staining on the mattress was very localised within the centre of the mattress. This would indicate that there's been no movement of somebody that was bleeding. Someone might have been asleep in the bed or lying on the bed at the time of the attack. John Chapman, when he was found in the ditch, had no defence wounds on him. The absence of any defence injuries would indicate that John Chapman had been attacked very swiftly, maybe in his sleep.
Witness statements from Kevin Lee's friends suggest Dennehy had arranged to meet with him later that day.
Somebody else reported that Kevin had stated that Joanna Dennehy had fantasised about having sex with him wearing a dress.
Kevin's DNA matches the blood found on the sofa at Rolleston Garth. Police established this was the location where Dennehy lured him to before stabbing him to death.
Did you murder Kevin Lee?
No comment.
Detectives hypothesised that Kevin's car was used to transport his body to Newborough. Then, while still wearing the sequin dress, the body was placed in a provocative position in the ditch.
When I found out how Kev was found, I thought it was very humiliating and degrading to the man that he was. I thought she couldn't just stop at killing him. She had to embarrass him more and embarrass his family.
To pose the body, she's insulting the corpse and she's insulting the people that find it. And that shows something about the pathology of the killer.
The knife found in the Vauxhall Astra returns from the lab with Dennehy's DNA. The blade dimensions are compared to the wounds on all 3 murder victims, as well as the 2 attacks in West Mercia.
The pathologist is able to say how far the knife went into the body.
What made her crimes more horrific was she used a small 3-inch lock knife. Now that is up close and personal.
There is now sufficient forensic evidence to further charge Joanna Dennehy with 3 counts of murder.
What fury was that girl holding inside her? What demonic forces made her do such terrible things?
Did you murder Kevin Lee?
Yeah, probably.
30-year-old Joanna Dennehy has been charged with the murders of Łukasz Slabazewski, John Chapman and Kevin Lee. On top of a mountain of circumstantial evidence, her DNA has been found on the knife seized from the green Vauxhall Astra that she was arrested in, and post-mortem results have linked that knife to all 3 victims. She has also been charged with attempted murder for 2 attacks in West Mercia.
There's always a huge satisfaction in identifying the perpetrators of any crime. You want to bring them to justice. Justice for the victim, justice for the family.
As legal teams prepare their cases for court, Dennehy is subjected to a full psychiatric assessment.
Joanna was diagnosed with psychopathic, antisocial and borderline personality disorders. She is someone with a superficial charm, and these diagnoses characterise her need to be in control and manipulate other people.
Joanna was born in a small village in Hertfordshire. Dennehy's mother worked in a local shop, and her father worked as a security guard.
She came from a middle-class family who doted on her, and she had a younger sister. Her father was quite a strict disciplinarian.
She excelled in sport and was a keen musician. A friend of Joanna's stated that butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. Her family report that it's when she reached puberty that they started to see a change in her attitudes and behaviour.
At the age of 15, Dennehy ran away from home.
Joanna started spending more time with older boys and men. She started consuming drugs, including cannabis and cocaine. There is a lot of research evidence to indicate that a teenager's brain is continually developing until the early 20s. A process called neural pruning takes place, which is like streamlining the different connections in the brain to make the brain work more efficiently. Substances that may affect that neural pruning process may have long-term impacts on psychological processes.
This impact led Dennehy on a downward spiral of petty crime and violent behaviour. By her late 20s, she had a criminal record, and within a few years, she would go on to commit the ultimate crime.
Murder, something.
Whilst on remand for the 2 attacks in West Mercia, Dennehy's associate, Gary Stretch, claims he was not involved in the murders. But forensic evidence proves otherwise.
When Gary Stretch was arrested, the trainers that he was wearing had traces of Lucas's blood on them.
A second pair of shoes seized from Gary Stretch's address links him to the pool of blood located at Rolleston Garth.
Footprints within the crime scene were found using aluminium powder on a tiled floor. These footprints were identified as Reebok Classic footprints, and these were linked to a pair of shoes owned by Gary Stretch, which would indicate that Gary Stretch had been in contact with Kevin Lee when he was bleeding.
This evidence, combined with John Chapman's DNA being found in the back of the Vauxhall Astra, enables the police to charge Gary Stretch for preventing the lawful burial of the three men. But there is more. CCTV evidence at a petrol station from the day of John and Kevin's murders shows Stretch having arrived in the Vauxhall Astra, and also a third suspect, seen driving Kevin's Ford Mondeo.
Gary Stretch is going inside and getting a bottle of water. Joanne Dennehy sitting in one car and Leslie Layton filling up a can of petrol. And then they drove off. So Leslie Layton is now starting to come into the frame.
Leslie Layton is arrested for perverting the course of justice. But when digital forensic specialists inspect his phone, they recover a deleted photograph of a dead John Chapman on his bed. Tony Ann recalls seeing Leslie Layton hours after the photograph had been taken.
Les came to my house and I was saying to him, I was like, I'm ringing John's phone. Like, it's off. I'm like, where's John? Where's John? And then as the more I'm asking questions, he put his head in his hands. And I didn't think of it now, but there was all like, you know, like dirt, like muck and red. And he was like, I've done something stupid, I can't go back from it. He's like, I can't believe we've done it.
Leslie Layton is charged with preventing the burial of two of the three men and perverting the course of justice. 8 months after her arrest, Joanna Dennehy is to stand trial.
I got a phone call 2 days before my appearance at the trial from the police, basically saying they would pick me up at 8:30 and they would travel with me and I would have to give evidence on the case. I didn't sleep, I was petrified.
At the pre-trial hearing, Dennehy is asked to enter a plea.
Deep in the pathology of all serial killers, they are psychopaths, and psychopaths love to be in control. And what Joanne Dennehy wanted to do was keep control. She played the game with her co-defendants, she played it with a lawyer who thought that she might plead not guilty at one point because of diminished responsibility. But the minute she got in front of a judge, she told him guilty.
By pleading guilty, there is no trial for Joanna Dennehy.
So I got picked up that morning by the police officer. We got halfway to the trial and he gets a phone call. And then he gets off the phone and he goes, so Tony, how would you feel about not giving evidence? I said, I'll marry you now. I don't want to. And he went, we're turning around. And I cried.
Gary Stretch's case goes to trial. He is found guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder and preventing the lawful burial of 3 bodies. He is sentenced to life with a minimum of 19 years. Leslie Layton is found guilty of 2 counts of preventing a lawful burial and perverting the course of justice. He is sentenced to 14 years in prison. Joanna Dennehy pleads guilty to murder and attempted murder and is summoned for sentencing.
When she went to the Old Bailey for sentencing, the judge asked her would she like to reconsider the verdict, and she said, I'm telling you, F off. And with that, she stuck her fingers up, and that was the end of it.
Joanna Dennehy is sentenced to a full life tariff. She will never be released.
The only way Joanne Dennehy is going to get out of prison is in a pine box.
I am of the view that her driver for this was this lust that she had to kill someone. She loved the excitement. This woman was not mad. She was just bad, very bad.
She can't hurt no one no more. We don't, there's nothing to be scared of now.